He gave her directions with muddy boots and a tired smile. She repaid him by rewriting every street in town with his name on it. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The GPS had stopped talking 15 minutes ago, leaving Elise gripping the wheel tighter with every passing mile. The voice that once confidently directed her through unfamiliar towns had gone eerily silent, as if even the satellite had given up trying to make sense of these winding back roads. Dust rose behind her in lazy plumes, clinging to the sleek black finish of her SUV like regret. She hadn't seen a gas station, billboard, or even a mailbox for miles, just endless stretches of cornfields and the occasional rusted fence leaning into time. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in a place where the road narrowed into gravel and the sky stretched too wide to feel safe. Her destination was a vineyard 2 towns over, an investment prospect dressed up as a weekend getaway, but somewhere between optimism and a missed left turn, she'd ended up swallowed by farmland. She slowed as the road curved past a grove of trees, and that's when she saw it. A crooked wooden sign half-eaten by ivy reading Carter Farm in faded white letters. Just beyond, an old barn slouched against the horizon, and in front of it, a man was bent over a wheelbarrow, shoveling feed with a rhythm that looked older than the barn itself. She rolled down the window. "Excuse me!" The man looked up slowly, wiping sweat and dirt from his forehead with the back of his hand. His eyes met hers without alarm, just a calm curiosity. He wore overalls, one strap unclipped, and his boots looked like they hadn't been new in 20 years. "Lost?" he asked, walking toward her. She gave a half laugh. "That obvious?" He smiled faintly, nodding at the road. This stretch doesn't see many black SUVs unless someone took a wrong turn or ran from something. She blinked. Maybe both. He leaned in just enough to see her GPS. "You're about 20 miles south of where you meant to be." "And how do I fix that?" He pointed down the road, his hand steady. "Keep going till you see the red silo. Turn left at the dog with one ear. Sounds strange, but you'll know it when you see it." She paused. "Dog with one ear?" He grinned. "Trust me. He'll bark like you owe him money." And just like that she laughed. A real one. Not polite, not guarded, just real. The rain wasn't a drizzle. It was the kind of downpour that turned gravel into soup and made windshield wipers work overtime just to keep up. Elise had driven through cities in blizzards, had landed business deals in hurricanes of pressure and deadlines. But somehow, this quiet, open field with its sideways rain felt more overwhelming than any of it. She hadn't even meant to stop. But the engine light had blinked twice, and then her dashboard had decided to throw a tantrum. So there she sat, on the shoulder of a road with no name, watching water streak down her windows while her car gently hissed in protest. She spotted him through the blur first, just a silhouette trudging through the muck beside a weathered red barn. No raincoat, no umbrella, just a man moving as if the weather hadn't noticed him, or maybe like he'd stopped noticing the weather years ago. He was hauling something heavy across the yard, bags of feed maybe, his shoulders hunched more from habit than strain. Mud clung to his boots like it didn't want to let go. Elise honked once, not too loud, not urgent. Just enough to say, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but the world's falling apart, and I might need a map, or a miracle." The man stopped mid-step and looked up. A pause, then a nod, like he was deciding if this interruption was worth getting wetter for. He dropped the feed bags with a soft thud and made his way across the yard, boots squelching with every step. She rolled the window down halfway. "I think my car's given up on me," she said, trying to keep her voice light, like she wasn't frustrated and lost in the middle of a storm. The man studied the vehicle like it had personally wronged him. Then he leaned down, resting his forearm on the window frame. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap. "Engine light?" he asked. "And everything else," she admitted. He nodded once. "You're not from around here." "Is it that obvious?" You're the first person in 3 years to wear heels on this road." She laughed in spite of herself. He straightened, water pouring off him like he'd grown roots in the rain. "Pop the hood. Let's see what we've got." The hood clanked shut with a finality that seemed to echo across the soaked farmland. Elise stood by, arms wrapped around herself, rain curling the edges of her sleek hair. The man stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag that looked more like a memory than a cloth. He didn't rush, didn't fill the silence with noise. He simply stood in the rain like someone who didn't mind getting drenched as long as something was getting done. "It was your alternator," he finally said. "Not dead yet, just stubborn. Like my Uncle Earl, used to play dead just to get out of church." She cracked a smile. "So, drivable?" "Drivable enough to get you back to civilization, if you don't ask too much of her." He nodded at the engine like it was a moody horse. "She'll behave, for now." "Thank you," Elise said sincerely. "I really appreciate it." He just nodded, then extended a hand, rough, strong, a handshake that didn't try to prove anything. "Jacob Carter," he said. "Carter Farm, for whatever that's worth." Elise shook his hand, and for a second it felt like something steadied inside her, like a peg finding its hole. She repeated the name in her mind, even as she said aloud, "Elise Rowan." He tilted his head, squinting at her through the rain. "Fancy name," she shrugged. "Fancy parents." He smiled faintly. "Makes sense." He turned slightly, motioning toward the barn. "If you want to wait the storm out, there's hot coffee inside. It's not city strong, but it'll fight the cold." "I'd like that," she said before she could think of a reason not to. As they walked toward the barn, mud sucking at her heels, she glanced back at the road. The wind had knocked the Carter Farm sign sideways, hanging crooked but still standing. Jacob caught her looking. "Farm's old," he said. "Leans a little more every year, but it's got heart." She nodded. "So does its owner." He chuckled, brushing rain from his brow. "Don't let the mud fool you. This place is humble, real humble." But his name stayed with her, echoing louder than the rain. Jacob Carter, as if the road itself wanted her to remember. She left with a wave and half a cup of black coffee in a foam cup that dripped just enough to stain her blouse. The rain had lightened, but the sky still hung low like a ceiling made of gray wool. Her tires kicked up gravel as she eased back onto the road, the engine humming just loud enough to cover her thoughts. The GPS came back to life a mile later, rerouting like it hadn't just spent an hour sulking in silence. "In 200 feet, it said in that artificial cheer, 'Turn left.'" She obeyed, then right, then left again. Then found herself staring at a fork in the road she was sure she'd passed already. She blinked. The red silo again, the one Jacob had mentioned. She sighed. It wasn't just the directions. It was something deeper, a kind of static behind her ribs that wouldn't settle. Her phone pinged, low signal. The blue dot on the map jittered and then spun like it couldn't find north. "Great," she muttered. "High-tech breadcrumbs, and I'm still lost in a cornfield." She could have kept driving, could have followed the GPS until it figured itself out. But something stopped her. Or maybe something pulled her. Not the map, not the machine, but the memory of a man in the rain who pointed with a kind of certainty that didn't need satellites. So she turned around. The car rolled slow, deliberate, not rushed, not forced, like her hands knew before her mind did. The Carter Farm sign came into view again, now dripping rain like it had been waiting for her to come back. She parked under the same tree, engine ticking, nerves buzzing. Jacob was on the porch this time, seated in a rocking chair that creaked against the wood. No surprise on his face. Just that same patient calm, like he saw people leave and return more often than not. "Wrong turn?" he asked, sipping something from a chipped mug. She stepped out of the car, wind tugging at her coat. "I think I liked your version of directions better." He didn't smile, just rocked once more. "That's 'cause they weren't for your car. They were for you." Morning rolled in with mist creeping low across the fields, and the sun playing coy behind a curtain of pale clouds. Elise walked out of the inn she'd found late the night before, one of those tiny roadside places that smelled like wood polish and faded memories. Her thoughts were still half asleep as she approached the SUV, keys in hand, already bracing herself for the day's emails, deadlines, and city voices that would soon roar back into her world. But something stopped her, a small square wedged carefully under her windshield wiper. It wasn't paper. It was a napkin, the kind from a diner, soft and a little crumpled from the dew, and on it, in rough, slanted handwriting that looked like it had been done in a hurry, but with care, were 12 simple words. "You left your coffee on my fence post. No charge for the directions." She stared at it for a long moment, her fingers frozen on the wiper blade. The handwriting was unmistakably Jacob's, plain, unpolished, and honest, like the man himself. She smiled and then laughed, a soft, startled sound that made a passing couple glance her way. Elise folded the napkin gently and slipped it into her coat pocket like it was something valuable. And somehow it was. More than the overpriced coffee she'd abandoned, more than the fancy shoes that were now smudged from yesterday's mud. That napkin felt more real than anything that had passed her desk in weeks. She climbed into the SUV, the engine purring to life, but she didn't drive off right away. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, motionless, while her eyes drifted across the windshield. It was ridiculous, really. Who writes notes on napkins anymore? Who remembers where someone leaves a coffee cup? Who bothers to make sure a stranger feels seen? Jacob Carter does. And somewhere between the rain, the directions, and the napkin that smelled faintly of hay and black coffee, something inside her shifted. Not loud, not sudden, but enough to know this wasn't the end of that road. It might just be the beginning. The hotel lobby was quiet, just the rustle of a newspaper and the faint hiss of the coffee machine behind the counter. Elise sat in the corner, legs crossed, tablet in her lap, and a navy blazer draped neatly over the chair beside her. Gone were the mud-splattered jeans from yesterday. Today she wore sharp lines, heels polished to mirror shine, and a watch that cost more than most used cars. Her hair was tied in a sleek bun, and her lipstick returned to its usual deep red. Calculated, powerful, unwavering. A man walked past her table, glanced once, then again. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he kept moving, too unsure to interrupt. She noticed. She always noticed. That was her job. Elise Rowan wasn't just someone who passed through towns. She was the person who redefined them, quietly, invisibly, from a boardroom far away. She built brands the way farmers built fences, post by post, wire by wire, making sure nothing fell apart. She had taken dying companies and turned them into household names. She had taught global CEOs how to smile without looking rehearsed, how to speak without sounding robotic. She could dismantle a brand in 4 sentences and rebuild it with a slogan and a 5-color palette. But none of that mattered in a cornfield. Out there, nobody cared about brand equity. Nobody asked about KPIs or conversion metrics. Jacob Carter hadn't even blinked when she told him her name. No widened eyes, no awkward, "Wait, the Elise Rowan?" He just nodded, offered her coffee, and told her she could wait out the storm in a barn that smelled like hay and thyme. It was disarming, and it was the first time in a long while that she felt like someone was speaking to her, not her title, not her resume, her. She looked down at her tablet, unread emails stacking by the minute, offers, demands, schedules, investors asking if she'd be back in the city by Monday. But all she could think about was a man in the rain who fixed her car without asking for anything, a man who noticed she left her coffee behind. And she wondered what would happen if she didn't go back right away. The sun broke through for the first time in days, spilling over the cornfield like gold poured from a quiet sky. It wasn't hot, just warm enough to soften the air and make everything feel like it had exhaled. Jacob had called that morning, his voice the same calm it always was. "If you're still around, I've got 2 coffees and an empty bench overlooking the field. Thought you might want to sit a spell." Elise almost said no. Her calendar said she had 3 calls lined up, 2 presentations due, and an inbox that hadn't slept in 4 years. But something in her rebelled gently. She got in the car and followed the dirt road until Carter Farm came back into view, humble and steady as if it had been waiting. Now she sat beside him on a worn wooden bench, a steaming paper cup in hand, rows of corn stretching into the horizon. There was no agenda here, no goal, just 2 people and the quiet, and the kind of conversation that unfolds only when nothing is trying too hard. "You grow all this yourself?" she asked, glancing at the endless green. "Just me, my 2 hands, and a tractor that coughs louder than it runs," he said, chuckling. She sipped her coffee. "It's peaceful." He nodded. "It listens better than most people." She turned to him. "Do you ever get tired of the quiet?" Jacob tilted his head, thinking, "I used to, back when I thought noise meant life, but now I think silence tells the truth." They sat there for a while, the breeze threading gently through the tall stalks, rustling them like pages turning. Eventually she said, almost to herself, "I miss being small, when summer felt like forever and I didn't have to prove anything." Jacob looked at her, really looked. "Funny. I miss being big, when I thought I could fix everything." She smiled, soft and crooked. "Maybe we're both just trying to get back to something." He raised his cup. "To lost things, then." She tapped hers against his, and finding pieces of them in the middle of nowhere. The clouds returned like they'd never really left. Slow, deliberate, heavy, with something more than water. Elise noticed first the way the light dimmed across the field, the way the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and earth like an old story. She looked up just as a drop landed on the back of her hand, then another on her coffee lid. A sigh escaped her, not out of frustration, but something quieter, resignation, or maybe understanding. Jacob didn't flinch. He just leaned back, stretched his legs out in front of him, and let the rain fall. "You don't move when it rains?" she asked, brushing moisture from her sleeve. He glanced at her, smiling beneath the brim of his cap. "Move where? I'm already where I need to be." She laughed lightly. "You sound like a fortune cookie." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said, grinning. "Those things are usually right when you don't want them to be." The sky opened slowly, gently, the kind of rain that didn't shout, but whispered as it kissed the leaves. Elise tucked her knees up on the bench, balancing the coffee between her palms. Her voice softened. "Can I ask something personal?" Jacob nodded, no hesitation. "Why do you still farm?" she asked. "I mean, it's obvious you're good at it, but with the prices, the weather, the markets, it just seems like a fight that never ends." He didn't answer right away, just watched the rain trickle down a cornstalk, his eyes distant but present. "Because dirt remembers your name better than most people do," he said finally. She turned to him, unsure she heard right. He continued, "You plant something, you show up, feed it, fight for it. And even if you fail, the ground doesn't forget you tried. Every harvest is a handshake, every drought a reckoning. But the soil, it remembers." Elise looked out over the field again, the rain dimpling the rows, the silence between them filling with something more profound than sound. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't need to respond. She just let it rain. Downtown was smaller than she expected, just 2 blocks long, maybe 3 if you counted the gravel stretch behind the old feed store. Elise rolled down the window as she drove, letting the air in, warm and thick with fried dough from the bakery and the faint scent of engine oil from the service station. This place had history in its bones, the kind of town where names meant something, where stories should have lingered on porches and in barbershop chairs. But as she stopped at the blinking 4-way light, something struck her. She didn't see a single sign that said Carter. Not on the storefronts, not on the street names, not on the faded plaques nailed to brick walls, that told tales of founders and war heroes. She parked outside the post office and stepped out, curiosity leading her down the sidewalk. Inside the general store, the shelves creaked and the floor groaned under the weight of decades. An old man rang up a woman buying flour and a lottery ticket. Elise approached the counter with a polite smile. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you know Jacob Carter?" The man squinted. "Jacob who?" "Carter. He owns the farm just off the East Road. Red barn, cornfields, kind of quiet." He scratched his chin. Carter? Ah, there was a Carter family way back. Owned some land, I think. But that was years ago." Elise blinked. "He still owns it?" The man shrugged. "Could be. Hard to keep track now. Most folks come and go." She left the store with a strange tightness in her chest. At the bakery, the same answer. At the gas station, someone guessed he was that farmer with the truck that's always breaking down. One woman thought he might have sold feed to the school once. Maybe. Couldn't say for sure. She sat back in her SUV, engine idling, staring out at the mural on the side of the town hall. Painted faces of men in suits, names engraved beneath them. No Carter. It didn't make sense. A man who had weathered storms, given away crops during lean years, helped fix the community's machines with nothing asked in return, and yet here he was no more than a whisper. A town built on his family's soil had somehow forgotten his name. The gravel crunched beneath her tires as Elise pulled into the drive again, this time unannounced. The morning sun filtered through scattered clouds, casting long shadows across the field. The barn stood just as she remembered, tilted slightly to one side, red paint peeling like sunburned skin. But today it looked more open, exposed. The roof was missing in patches, boards scattered like fallen teeth, and up on a ladder stood Jacob Carter, hammer in hand, balancing between stability and stubbornness. She stepped out of the SUV and called up to him. "Did you lose a fight with a tornado?" Jacob didn't flinch, didn't look down, just finished driving the nail home before finally glancing her way. "Roof gave out during the last storm," he said casually, as if describing a flat tire. "Was bound to happen." Elise shaded her eyes with one hand. "You're up there without any help?" "I've got gravity," he said with a half-smile, "and questionable judgment." She walked closer, stepping over a coil of rope and a bucket of rusted nails. Why not call someone? Insurance? The town? He didn't answer right away, just set another board in place, steady as a man who'd been patching things most of his life. Finally, he said, "Some things are easier fixed when you don't wait for permission." Elise leaned against the fence, watching him. There was no frustration in his movements, no swearing under breath, just calm, determined rhythm. Hammer, brace, repeat. She realized then it wasn't just about the roof. It was about what it meant to rebuild something with your own hands, even when the world acted like it didn't notice you anymore. "You need a break?" she called. "Breaks are for people who believe in finishing early," she smiled. "You always this stubborn?" "Only when the barn leaks and no one else seems to care." For a moment the wind shifted, catching the scent of fresh-cut wood and summer rain still lingering in the boards. Elise looked up at him, this man piecing together a roof like it was nothing more than a chore, and everything that made him who he was. He glanced down again, eyes steady. "Just another day," he said. But Elise knew better. The bell above the bakery door jingled as Elise stepped inside, the smell of cinnamon and warm yeast wrapping around her like a worn quilt. It was small, cozy, the kind of place where the menu never changed, and neither did the people. A handwritten chalkboard listed the day's specials, peach hand pies, sourdough rolls, and something called Grandma May's morning muffins. Behind the counter stood a girl who looked barely 20, flour dusting her apron, a streak of it on her cheek. She greeted Elise with a practiced smile, though her eyes flicked toward the unfamiliar heels and tailored blazer with a hint of polite curiosity. "What can I get you?" Elise hesitated, then nodded toward the muffins. Two of those. And actually, can I ask you something? The girl wiped her hands on a dish towel. Sure. Do you know Jacob Carter? The girl's face brightened like someone had mentioned a favorite uncle. Of course. Everyone knows Mr. Carter. Or so, well, they should. Elise tilted her head. Should? She leaned on the counter, lowering her voice like she was about to share a secret. He's the kind of guy this town forgets too easily. Doesn't show up in newspapers, doesn't care about attention, but he's always been there. Elise listened, intrigued. He used to drop off bushels of corn and tomatoes to the school lunchroom in the fall, the girl continued. Didn't say anything. Just left him at the back door with a note. Hope this helps. No need to thank me. Elise smiled. That sounds like him. The girl nodded. He helped my dad fix our truck once. Wouldn't take a dime. Said, you can pay me back by being kind to someone else. I mean, who says that anymore? She boxed up the muffins and added a small scone without charging. That's on the house. He likes those. Always gets one when he comes in. Elise took the box, suddenly aware of how much this town had quietly leaned on one man without ever really seeing him. And here was a girl, still dusted in flour, keeping part of his story alive one muffin at a time. Doesn't ask for much, the girl said softly as Elise turned to leave. Never has. The boardroom sat 30 stories above the noise, sealed in glass and climate control, where the air smelled faintly of lavender sanitizer and ambition. Elise stood at the head of the long table, her laptop open, slides projected onto the wall behind her. Around the table, a dozen polished executives scrolled through her deck on matching tablets, nodding like they understood rural markets, though most hadn't seen a cornfield in years. She clicked to the next slide. The Heartland Revival, rebranding rural advertising for the modern age. Billboards are dead, one man said without looking up, unless we paint them with NFTs. Elise forced a tight smile. They're not dead, they're just forgotten, much like the communities they serve. A few eyes lifted, half interested. She continued, walking them through strategy. Modern fonts with rustic textures, hyper-local storytelling, digital overlays for QR codes in remote towns. It was good, it was clever. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt them thinning. Her throat tightened around the next sentence. We position rural identity as nostalgic, but aspirational. And that's when it hit her. Jacob Carter's name wasn't on any sign. His stories weren't nostalgic, they were present, ongoing, unpolished and unbranded. He didn't need to be stylized or repackaged, he just needed to be seen. Elise paused mid-sentence, staring at the photo projected behind her, a dusty highway billboard with nothing on it but peeling paint and a faded promise for fireworks ahead. She closed her laptop. Elise? Someone said. She looked around the room, every suit, every watch, every expectation. Sorry, she said, her voice even. This isn't the story I want to tell. She gathered her things. One man coughed. Another leaned back in his chair, annoyed. Elise, what are you doing? She straightened. I'm walking out. Not away, just out. And she did. Through the glass doors, past the blinking phones and white noise machines, down the elevator, out into the street where the city hummed like it always had. But her thoughts were already back in a cornfield, on a road with no name, where a man built things that didn't need selling to matter. The next time she visited, Elise brought 2 things, a fresh box of cinnamon scones from the bakery and a question that had been buzzing in her head since she left the city. Jacob was fixing a fence post when she pulled up. The truck bed beside him was filled with crooked nails and stubborn planks that refused to line up straight. He looked up as she stepped out of the car, brushing sawdust from her jacket. Back again? He asked, not surprised, just quietly glad. Brought scones, she replied, holding up the box like a peace offering. He wiped his hands on a rag and joined her under the shade of a tree. They sat on an old bench made from what looked like salvaged porch railings, the sun filtering through the leaves like a slow dance. "I've been thinking," Elise said, passing him a scone, "about signs." "Warning ones or road ones?" he asked with a smirk, biting into the pastry. "Road ones," she said. "The ones nobody seems to notice out here. There are streets that don't have names, intersections that rely on memory. I drove through the county and realized half the roads don't even show up on GPS." Jacob nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Out here we don't really use signs. We say things like, 'Turn where the oak splits in two,' or 'Head east till you smell the pig farm.' But that's exactly it," she said. "I passed 3 faded signs last week. One was just bent metal hanging from a single bolt. Doesn't it ever bother you?" He leaned back against the tree. "Not really. People follow instinct more than directions, especially around here. You don't need a sign to tell you you're home. You just know." She looked at him, trying to decide if that was wisdom or just small-town simplicity. "But what about outsiders?" she asked. "People passing through?" He glanced at her then, a long look like he already knew she wasn't just talking about street signs. "Sometimes," he said, "it's not about getting them where they're going, it's about giving them a reason to stop." And just like that, the question changed. The paperwork came in a manila envelope, folded neatly and unsigned. Elise stared at it on her hotel room desk, the lamplight casting long shadows over the words. Municipal infrastructure rights, exterior wayfinding and road markers. The kind of title most people wouldn't give a second glance. Most people wouldn't care, but she did. The town hadn't updated its signage records in over a decade. No funding, no oversight, just rusted poles and weather-worn arrows that leaned more than they pointed. The rights had quietly fallen into limbo, technically owned by the county, practically owned by no one. And now, with one signature and a quiet wire transfer, Elise Rowan could change that. She didn't tell anyone. Not her firm, not her assistant, not even Jacob, especially not Jacob. This wasn't for applause. This wasn't branding. It was something else, something she couldn't quite name yet, just a tug in her chest that said, "Do this, quietly, thoroughly, for him." She signed the last page, her pen gliding over the dotted line with the precision of someone used to contracts but suddenly aware of the weight behind this one. It wasn't a billboard deal. It wasn't about placement or profit. It was about giving shape to something invisible. By morning, the deed was filed, transferred, archived. No press release, no launch. Just a quiet phone call to a local contractor she trusted, asking for updates to begin. Fresh poles, new bolts, proper materials, and a list of names she would provide. Names that meant something, names that had been missing from this place for far too long. She closed her laptop and sat back in the stiff hotel chair, watching as the first light of morning painted the room with gold. In the silence, she imagined Jacob's reaction. A frown, probably, a shake of the head, maybe even a quiet scolding, but beneath all that, she hoped, a trace of understanding. Because some people build barns, and some people quietly rebuild the roads that lead to them. Elise waited until the moment felt right. After the fence was fixed, after the coffee had gone cold in both their cups, and after Jacob had said something about the sky smelling like late summer. She reached into her bag, pulled out a slim envelope, and held it out toward him. He didn't take it. "Just a small thank you," she said, tone even. Practiced, the way she used to talk to high-end clients when she was smoothing egos and sealing million-dollar pitches. But Jacob Carter wasn't a client. He didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at the envelope like it was a snake she'd pulled from her purse. "Elise," he said slowly, "I appreciate the gesture, but no." She furrowed her brow. "Jacob." "I'm serious," he said, wiping his hands on a rag and shaking his head like he'd seen this movie before. "You needed help. I helped. That's not something you pay for. But I took your time, your tools, your afternoon. Let me—" "No," he said again, firmer this time. but not unkind. You think I helped you because I wanted something back? She exhaled, the envelope still in her hand, wilting slightly in the breeze. I just don't like owing people. Jacob looked at her, really looked, the kind of gaze that quiets a room. Then don't think of it as a debt. Think of it as what people do when they still believe in being decent. He turned back toward the field, adjusting a post that didn't need adjusting. Elise stared at the envelope, fingers curling around its edge, the corners damp now from her grip. Doesn't everything have a price out here? She asked quietly. Jacob paused, hands resting on the wood, then turned his head just enough to answer. Nope, not the things that matter, not kindness, not respect, not a second cup of coffee with someone who listens. Elise slipped the envelope back into her bag, the silence between them no longer awkward, but something like understanding, something that didn't need a receipt, and, somehow, that felt like the richest exchange she'd made in years. The mayor's office smelled like paper and lemon-scented floor polish. Its walls were lined with black and white photos of ribbon cuttings and parades, men with hats and women with gloves, all frozen in moments no one quite remembered. Mayor Bill Hanley sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived 2 world wars and one slow coffee spill still drying near the edge. Elise sat across from him, legs crossed, calm but direct. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. He was the kind of man who appreciated straight talk. His sleeves were rolled up, his collar slightly askew, the kind of mayor who still did his own paperwork and probably shoveled snow from the courthouse steps if no one else showed up. I want to invest in your town's identity, Elise said. Bill leaned back in his chair. That so? Yes. I'd like to work with your zoning and infrastructure committees to update every neglected road sign, every street marker, and give them names that mean something to the people here. Real names. Legacy names. She paused. Not brand deals, not corporate nonsense, just meaning. Bill didn't flinch, didn't ask what she was selling. He looked at her like a man trying to measure intent, not profit, not politics, but motive. Then he scratched his jaw, sat forward, and opened a drawer. Elise, you don't have to finish, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. You're the first person who's ever walked in here wanting to honor this place, not fix it. She blinked. You're serious? He nodded. I've got grant applications collecting dust. State funding we never claimed because no one knew how to write a proposal. You're offering to pay for it yourself? She nodded once. Then the answer's yes, he said without hesitation. Use our resources. Use our map records. Hell, use the high school art club if you want to paint the signs yourselves. He extended a calloused hand across the desk. Elise took it, feeling something unfamiliar. Not victory, not negotiation. Belonging. For the first time, someone said yes before she even had to prove why she deserved it. The chickens were restless that morning, flapping and muttering like gossiping old ladies as Jacob scattered feed across the ground. The sky was still the soft gray of pre-dawn, dew clinging to everything like the night didn't want to let go. He moved slow, deliberate, the way farmers do when they've done the same routine every morning for years. He didn't notice the truck when it came, didn't hear the soft clink of metal or the ladder settling against the post. By the time he looked up, the crew was already gone. What caught his eye first wasn't the motion, but the stillness. Something different, but quiet, like a memory that had finally returned to the room. The old county road sign, bent, rusted, barely legible, was gone. In its place stood a new post, fresh, straight, bolted tight. The sign itself was simple, white background, black letters, no frills, no flash. Carter Way. Jacob stood there, feed bucket in one hand, the chickens forgotten at his feet. The breeze lifted the edge of his worn flannel shirt, the kind he patched more than he replaced. He stared at the sign like it might vanish if he blinked too hard. He didn't smile right away, didn't move, just stood there, as if the world had paused for him and him alone. The road had never had a name before, not really. Folks just said, the turn past the mill or the stretch before the woods, no one needed a sign to know where he lived. But now it was there, permanent, stated, seen, Carter Way. Not because he asked for it, not because he'd paid for it, but because someone, somewhere, had decided he was worth remembering. He finally exhaled, slow and quiet, like he'd been holding his breath for years. Jacob tipped his cap slightly to the sign, like you would to an old friend. Then, without a word, he turned back toward the coop, because the chickens still needed feeding. And sometimes the biggest moments in life arrive without applause. Just a morning, a sign, and the quiet proof that maybe, just maybe, you mattered. At first, no one noticed. Just one new sign on a quiet road most folks didn't drive unless they had chickens to feed or fences to mend. But then another one appeared the following week, this time on the winding hill near the old grain elevator. It read Carter Ridge, stenciled in the same clean type as the first, posted with precision. By the third week, it was impossible not to notice. Jacob's Crossing stood at the fork near the creek, where kids used to skip rocks and old men told stories that never ended. No one knew who put it there. The city hadn't made an announcement, the county hadn't issued a statement, but there it was, bolted clean into the post like it had always belonged. The whispers began at the diner. "You see that new sign?" someone muttered over coffee. "I thought that road didn't even have a name." It does now. At the feed store, theories multiplied. The mayor wouldn't say much, just smiled behind his mustache and told folks to enjoy the fresh paint. Meanwhile, Elise watched from the background. She never stayed long when the crews arrived, always gone before the bolts were tightened, before the dust settled. She picked the names carefully, like poetry. Places Jacob had mentioned in passing. Trails he walked as a boy. The ridge he once pointed to and said, "That's where the hawks teach their young to fly." Farmer's Bend appeared next, at the sharp turn near the orchard where his grandfather's truck once ran off the road and kept going, only to come to a stop unharmed in a thicket of wildflowers. The town buzzed louder now, but Jacob? He said nothing. He'd drive by them in his truck, glance up, maybe linger for a second, but never speak of them. Just kept working, fixing, farming, quiet as ever. But at night, when Elise looked out from her inn window, she wondered if he knew, if he felt it, that slow shift, that quiet recognition, that someone was leaving a trail not for herself, but for him. A breadcrumb path made of steel and letters. Whispers built monuments. She was just leaving the clues. It started as a glitch, at least that's what the internet thought. A bored cartographer in a dim office cubicle flagged it first. The small town of Maribel, population just shy of 4,000, had suddenly sprouted a handful of unfamiliar names on its digital map: Carter Way, Jacob's Crossing, Carter Ridge, Farmer's Bend. New labels, crisp and clean, tucked into rural corners the satellite rarely paid attention to. No formal submissions, no government announcement, just there. The update rolled out quietly at first, but someone noticed. Then someone tweeted. Okay, but who is Jacob Carter? And why does this town sound like a love letter to him? By noon, the post had racked up 20,000 likes. By evening, Elise's phone was buzzing non-stop. Not from friends, journalists, bloggers, commentators fishing for a story. Everyone wanted to know, who was Jacob Carter? A war hero? A lost politician? Some small-town legend? And why had an entire grid of forgotten dirt roads been quietly rewritten in his name? One outlet ran with the headline, "The Ghost Farmer. Who is Jacob Carter, and why is he all over Google Maps?" The local paper picked it up too, less dramatic, more sincere. Maribel's map honors one of its own, but why now? Jacob hadn't read any of it. When the bakery girl mentioned it while handing him his usual scone, he just shrugged. Maps don't change what's already there. Elise, on the other hand, saw the world noticing, and for once she didn't rush to control the narrative. No press kits, no interviews, no corrections. Let them speculate. Because that was the point. The mystery wasn't just the man, it was how long the world had gone without seeing him. A man who'd fed his town without fanfare, rebuilt his roof with quiet hands, and fixed strangers' cars in the rain. Now the world knew his name, not because he shouted it, but because someone finally put it where it belonged, on the roads he'd walked his whole life. The folding chairs were uneven, the microphones squeaked, and the old recreation hall smelled faintly of coffee and varnish. It wasn't packed, just a scattering of familiar faces from around Maribel. The baker, the librarian, a few retired teachers. Even the mayor sat in the back with a clipboard he didn't bother writing on. Elise stood near the side, heart thudding harder than she expected. She hadn't forced him, just asked, gently, the way one asks someone to remember out loud. "Tell them what you've done," she had said, or better yet, tell them why you never needed anyone to notice. And somehow, Jacob had said yes. Now he stood behind the podium, one hand resting on it like he didn't quite trust it not to collapse. His flannel shirt was neatly pressed, well, neater than usual, and his boots were clean, but still his. He cleared his throat once, then again, the microphone letting out a sharp feedback squeal that made a few people flinch. He chuckled nervously. "Guess it doesn't like my voice." A few polite laughs. "I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say," he began, eyes flicking down to a crumpled paper in his pocket that he never pulled out. "Didn't think I had a story worth telling. Still don't, really." The room stayed quiet, waiting. I've lived on the same land my whole life. Woke up to the same view every morning. Fixed fences, fed chickens, patched roofs that never stayed patched. Folks would wave. Sometimes they'd stop by. Most times they didn't. He paused, looked out at them, at the eyes that now held something more than politeness. And somewhere along the way, I guess I just got used to it. Being helpful, being quiet, being invisible. Elise held her breath. Jacob's voice lowered slightly, steadier. "I thought being invisible was normal, that doing good things without being seen was the point. And maybe it is. But lately, someone's been putting my name where people can't miss it, on signs, on roads, on maps." He looked directly at her now. "And I'm not used to that, but I'm learning that maybe being seen doesn't mean you're asking for praise. Maybe it just means someone saw the good and thought it deserved a place to stay." He stepped back, nodding once. "That's all I've got." And the room, silent for a beat, broke into something quiet and rare. Applause that didn't fill the room but filled the space between him and the world he never asked to notice. It started with one tractor, then another, then 6 more, lined up like a slow-moving river of rust, paint, and stubborn history rolling down Main Street, each one decorated in its own way, some with bunting and faded flags, others with flower baskets tied to the front grills, and one with a hand-painted sign that read "Built with Grit, Grown with Heart." Kids waved from hay bales hitched to the back of trailers. Old men wore overalls with pride. Mothers balanced lemonade cups in one hand and toddlers on hips. The town hadn't had a real parade in years. But today wasn't about fireworks or floats. It was about something quieter. Tractors rolling over roads now bearing names like Jacob's Crossing and Carter Ridge. Streets that had gone nameless for decades now wore their letters like a badge. Elise stood in the back near the library steps, sunglasses on, arms crossed, not out of disapproval, but to keep her hands from shaking with something she didn't want to name. Joy, maybe. Gratitude. Whatever it was, it warmed her more than the sun. Jacob wasn't in the front. He hadn't even wanted to be in the parade at all. Said it was too much fuss for a man who hasn't done anything worth fussing over. But the town had other plans. So there he was, about halfway through the procession, driving a battered green tractor that creaked with every turn of the wheels. His hat was pulled low, but not low enough to hide the embarrassed smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Every time someone clapped or waved, He tipped his cap with the kind of humility that said he still didn't understand why anyone would bother. Someone handed him a lemonade as he passed. He nodded his thanks and kept rolling forward. Elise watched him, arms loosening, heart full. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. He looked her way once, just once, and that was enough. Because sometimes the loudest celebration isn't in the sound. It's in the stillness of being seen, of being remembered, of becoming part of a town story, written not in headlines, but in the rhythm of wheels on gravel and hearts finally turning home. It went up overnight. Nobody saw the crew. Nobody heard the hammering or the rustle of canvas in the wind. Just one morning, as dawn stretched pink across the horizon, the townspeople looked up on the edge of Highway 9 and saw it. Bold, honest, and quiet in the way only something deeply true can be. A billboard, not plastered with advertisements or bright colors, just a photograph. Black and white, raw, two hands, large, weathered, unmistakably real, cupped around a tiny seedling, dirt still clinging to the creases like memory. No face, no branding, just hands. The kind that had patched roofs in the rain, the kind that had fixed cars without asking for names, the kind that had held on to this town long after it stopped holding back. Beneath the image, in clean serif letters, were the words, "This town grew from these." No logo, no website, just that. By noon, cars had slowed to stare. By evening, someone left flowers at the base of the signpost, tucked between wild grass and gravel. And by nightfall, half the town had driven out just to see it for themselves. Mothers with curious children, old couples in pickup trucks, teenagers who didn't yet understand what it meant but felt it anyway. Jacob heard about it from the mailman. He didn't go see it right away. Instead, he kept fixing the hinge on the barn door that stuck every summer. He fed the chickens. He answered a call from Elise and said nothing about the billboard. But the next morning, before the sun fully broke, he drove out alone, parked just off the shoulder, walked through dew-wet grass until he stood beneath it. And there they were, his hands. He recognized them not by shape, but by the life behind them. Lines formed by years, grooves dug by purpose. He reached up, almost touched the base of the frame, then let his arm fall back to his side. No one was around, so he did what only a man like Jacob Carter would do when he saw his life reflected back at him. He whispered, "Thank you," to no one, and then got back in his truck, heading home like nothing had changed, though everything quietly had. The moon hung low over Farmer's Bend, casting a soft silver wash over the road that curved like a question mark through the trees. Crickets filled the silence with their steady chorus, and the wind carried the scent of fresh hay and something sweeter, possibility. The new sign stood proud at the curve, its white letters catching just enough moonlight to glow like it had waited for this moment all along. They hadn't planned to end up there. Jacob had offered to walk Elise back to her car after helping her move a stack of old lumber from the back of the barn. An excuse, maybe, to spend a little more time in the easy quiet that always settled between them after the work was done. And when they reached the bend, they paused like the road itself had asked them to. Elise looked up at the sign, her breath visible in the cool night air. "Farmer's Bend," she said softly. "I named this one for the way you always lean into people, like you expect them to leave, but you hold space anyway." Jacob tilted his head, considering it. "Funny," he murmured. "I thought you named it for the way the road curves, like it's protecting something." She smiled, but it faded slowly into stillness. The stars above them blinked quietly. His truck waited in the distance with its door still ajar, radio faintly playing some old country song she didn't know, but felt. And then she did it. She leaned in. Not abruptly, not with intent. Just naturally. Like gravity knew something her heart hadn't caught up to yet. She didn't mean to make it a moment, didn't mean to make it mean anything, but it did. Her lips brushed his cheek first, hesitating, uncertain, then shifted, barely, until they found his. He didn't move away. He didn't pull her closer either. Just let it happen. Quiet, tender, real. A kiss with no expectations, no promises, just the truth of the moment. When she pulled back, Jacob's eyes stayed on hers. "You didn't mean to do that," he said gently. "No," she whispered, "but I didn't want to stop it either." And under the moonlight, neither of them said another word. They didn't have to. The first headline came from a blog that specialized in design trends and cultural critiques. Rebranding Rural, when nostalgia becomes vanity. Then came another, one woman's billionaire playground of road signs and sentimentality. The tone varied. Some pieces were snide, others oddly poetic. But they all circled the same conclusion. Elise Rowan had lost her mind. The interview she declined only fueled the fire. Speculation bloomed. Was it performance art? A PR stunt gone rogue? A rich woman's way of romanticizing struggle? Online, the comments grew sharper. "This is pity tourism dressed up in flannel. She's turning a quiet town into a branding experiment." Jacob didn't read any of it at first, but small towns have long memories and short gossip trails. One morning, after a supply run to the hardware store, the cashier asked if he was the billboard guy. Someone else snickered by the door. A customer muttered, "Must be nice to be the face of someone else's fantasy." By the time Jacob pulled into the farm, his jaw was tight, and his silence heavier than usual. Elise noticed the shift immediately. She found him in the barn, sanding an old bench that didn't need sanding. "They're laughing at you," he said flatly, not looking up. "At me. At this town." She stayed quiet. "They think I'm some pet project, some backwoods symbol you've pinned on a signpost like a trophy." "I know," she said softly. He stopped sanding. "Do you?" Elise stepped closer, voice steady but quiet. "I didn't do this for them, or for headlines, or maps. I did it because I saw a man who had given his whole life to a town that forgot to say thank you. And I thought, maybe the roads should remember, even if the people don't." He stared at her, jaw set, emotion flickering just behind the frustration. "I didn't want to make you a symbol, Jacob," she added. "I wanted to give you back your name." He didn't answer right away, just breathed, long, slow, and deep, like he was setting something down he'd been carrying too long. Then he whispered, "That's all I ever needed." It started with a groan in the trees, the kind of sound the land makes when it's bracing for something bigger. The sky turned the color of bruised steel, and the wind began to howl, not playful, not curious, but wild and determined, like it was trying to tear something loose from the earth. Jacob had seen storms before, had watched shingles fly and fences fall. He'd patched the barn roof more times than he could count, but this one came harder, meaner. It arrived like a warning. By nightfall, the rain was sideways. Branches snapped like dry bones. The chickens screamed and scattered, and then came the moment he knew was coming, the sharp, gut-deep sound of wood ripping from itself. The roof tore away like paper, flung into the wind. He stood in the doorway, soaked through, watching his barn take its final breath. And he didn't curse, didn't cry, just stood there, hands clenched, heart quiet. Because sometimes you love something too much to be angry when it lets go. The next morning, the sun returned like nothing had happened. Blue skies, still air, and a barn open to the heavens, beams exposed, hay-soaked and scattered. Jacob didn't have a plan, not this time. He just picked up his hammer and started gathering what could be salvaged. But before he could even lift the first plank, a truck pulled into the driveway. Then another, and another. The librarian showed up with coffee and gloves. The mayor brought his tool belt. 2 kids from the high school came carrying ladders. The bakery girl hauled in fresh boards with flour still on her apron. Even folks Jacob had never spoken to showed up, wordless but ready, stepping onto the farm like they'd been waiting for a reason to come all along. No one asked, no one knocked, they just worked. And Jacob, for the first time in a long time, didn't work alone. He stood beside Elise as dusk settled and the new roof took shape beneath a sky that finally felt forgiving. "I thought they forgot me," he said. She nodded. Sometimes people need a storm to remember who's worth rebuilding. By midweek, the out-of-town crew Elise had quietly hired rolled in with polished trucks and toolkits that gleamed like they'd never touched real dirt. They came with clipboards and branded T-shirts, ready to measure and manage. She appreciated them. Really, she did. But even as they unfolded blueprints and talked timelines, something in the air said this job wasn't theirs to finish. Not this one. Because by the time the second truck backed in, the gravel drive was already lined with pickups older than some of the workers themselves. Farmers with weathered hands and calloused knuckles. Teenagers in borrowed work gloves. Elders who couldn't lift anymore but sat nearby with lemonade and memories, pointing out which boards had splintered during the storm and which ones Jacob had patched with tin and hope years before. They didn't ask permission, they just showed up. One boy climbed the ladder before the hired crew had even unpacked. An older man brought nails in an old coffee tin. Someone's mom rolled in with casseroles and told the roofing team, "Lunch is handled." And just like that, the project shifted. It stopped being a rebuild and became something closer to a revival. Elise watched it all unfold from the fence line, arms folded, heart open. She'd brought in professionals, but what the town brought was ownership. The barn's new beams were cut by locals, the shingles passed up in human chains. One high schooler climbed onto the roof and carved a small JC into the ridge board before sealing it beneath the final panel. No one stopped him. Jacob just smiled and shook his head like he wasn't used to being honored, but didn't quite want it to stop. By sunset, the barn stood again, not perfect, not polished, but strong, wiser, a little crooked in the way all good things are. And when the last ladder came down and the final board was nailed in, Elise looked around and realized something she hadn't planned for. This wasn't about a man anymore. It was about a town finally remembering what built it. Not the signs, not the slogans, but the hands, the stories, the roots. They hadn't spoken of him much. Jacob rarely did. His father had been moved to a care home just outside Maribel 2 years back when the forgetting started. First little things, where he'd park the truck, how to get back home, then names, then faces. On hard days, Jacob said little. On harder days, he didn't say anything at all. But today, Elise made the call. She arranged for a nurse and a driver, set the route carefully. And just before sunset, a weathered van rolled slowly up the hill to Carter Ridge, its wheels crunching the gravel with reverence. Jacob stood by the new sign, one hand resting on the post, the other hanging heavy by his side. He didn't speak as they opened the van door, and the nurse gently helped his father down, Walker trembling under slow, determined steps. The old man looked thinner than Jacob remembered, eyes clouded but still deep, still watching. Where are we?" he asked, voice crackling like a phonograph. Jacob swallowed. "Carter Ridge." The name seemed to ripple through the man's mind like a stone dropped into water. He looked up at the sign, looked at the land, then at Jacob. And something shifted. His shoulders straightened, just a little. His lips parted. And then, like a memory bubbling to the surface, he said, "This used to be your mother's favorite view." Jacob blinked hard, but didn't look away. "She'd sit right there," the old man added, pointing toward the fence line, "on the truck bed. Said the sunset here could teach a man how to pray." Silence wrapped around them like a soft quilt. And then Jacob's father, standing with the sky blazing gold behind him, did something he hadn't done in years. He cried. Tears ran silently down weathered cheeks, not loud, not messy, just slow and honest, the kind of tears that come when something long lost finds its way home. Jacob stepped forward, wrapped an arm around his father's shoulder, and the old man whispered, "She would have loved this, all of it." Elise turned away, just enough to give them space. But in her heart she knew Sometimes you don't need to be remembered by the world, just by the ones who matter most. She hadn't meant to find it. The glove box wasn't locked, just stuck the way old things get when they've been forgotten or avoided. She'd climbed into Jacob's truck to move it out of the sun. His shoulder had been bothering him, and he'd gone inside to rest. The seat creaked beneath her as she slid in, the scent of old leather and pine soap settling around her like memory. She reached for the handle, jiggled it loose, and the door fell open with a soft thunk. A few things tumbled out, an old map, a screwdriver, a faded packet of wildflower seeds, and then, folded carefully and worn at the edges, was a letter. No envelope, no stamp, just her name written on the outside in pen that had pressed harder than it needed to. Elise. She hesitated, considered putting it back, but the paper felt warm in her hands, like it had waited for her. She unfolded it slowly. The ink was steady, unhurried. Honest. I've tried to say things out loud, but I don't always have the shape for the words. So I'm writing them, in case silence keeps winning. You came here like a storm I didn't see coming, not loud, just strong in a way that pulled things out of the soil I thought I'd buried. I don't know what you're looking for, but if it's something real, I hope you find it here, in this town, in me. You asked me once why I never put my name on anything, why I let people forget. Truth is, I didn't think I deserved to be remembered. But then you did it anyway. If I had the words, I'd name every road after you. Her breath caught. She read it again, slower, then folded it back with the same care he'd used when he first tucked it away. She placed it where she found it, heart full, throat tight. And as she sat there, hands on the wheel of a truck that had carried so much silence, Elise smiled to herself. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It waits patiently in glove boxes, written but never forgotten. The evening light stretched long over the fields, casting everything in that golden hush that only comes right before the world goes quiet. Jacob had asked her to come by near dusk. No reason, no urgency. Just, if you're not busy, there's something I want you to see. She found him by the road, standing next to a fresh post, dirt still clinging to the base like it hadn't quite settled yet. He had one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on the wooden beam, like he was grounding himself. Elise slowed as she approached, boots crunching softly against the gravel. "Another sign?" she asked, tilting her head. He gave a half smile, eyes fixed on the metal plate bolted to the post. She stepped beside him and looked up. Elise Lane. 2 words. Simple, unadorned. But they knocked the air from her lungs in the most beautiful way. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. Finally, Jacob cleared his throat. "Wasn't sure if I should put it out here. Figured you'd think it was too much." She shook her head gently. "It's perfect." He looked at her then, not the glance of a man testing the water, but the steady gaze of someone who'd stood in the storm and still wanted to reach for the sun. "I don't have a ring," he said quietly. "I don't have a 5-year plan or a speech or a way to make this look good on paper." She blinked, already feeling the swell of something behind her ribs. "But I've got this road," he said, "and I'd like it if you stayed on it, maybe just a while longer." Her eyes brimmed, and she bit back a laugh that trembled like it didn't know if it should be joy or disbelief. "That your way of asking me to stay?" she whispered. He nodded once. "It's my way of asking you to make this your home, too." She didn't answer with words. She just stepped in, wrapped her arms around him, and let her silence say what he already knew. She was already home. The town had changed, but not in the way cities do, with scaffolding and skylines. Maribel grew softer, steadier. It didn't sprawl, it deepened. The roads stayed narrow, the shops stayed small, and the air still carried the scent of soil and sunrise. But now, something was different. Something in the way people paused at corners, in the way they read the names on signs not like directions, but like chapters in a book they finally realized was worth reading. Elise Lane, Carter Ridge, Farmer's Bend, Jacob's Crossing. They weren't just labels anymore, they were lessons. And on Thursday mornings, yellow school buses rolled into town from neighboring counties, engines sputtering to a stop in front of the little museum the mayor had helped open in the old feed store. Inside, kids gathered around grainy photos and dusty boots behind glass, their fingers pressing eagerly against display labels that told the story of a man who once gave directions to a lost woman in the rain. Sometimes Elise came by to speak. Sometimes she stayed in the back, just listening. He didn't build a business, one teacher would say. He built a way of being seen. They'd take the children on walking tours, pointing out the signs. This one, a guide would say, tapping Carter Way, wasn't named because he asked for it. It was named because someone finally noticed who had been holding this town together. The students would ask questions. Did he get famous? Did he become rich? Did he ever leave? And the answer was always the same. He stayed. He stayed and fixed things when no one noticed. He stayed and gave without needing anything back. He stayed because some people don't need a spotlight to shine. They just need room to give. At the end of the tour, just past the mural with Jacob's hands cradling the seedling, there was a quote in bold lettering. This town didn't grow because someone chased greatness. It grew because someone practiced kindness until the ground remembered his name. And every time someone read it aloud, the town stood a little taller. The new brochures were printed on soft parchment with faded edges, the kind designed to feel old, even when fresh off the press. At the welcome kiosk beside the bakery, tourists now stopped to pick them up, brushing crumbs from their fingers as they unfolded the town's newest treasure, the Maribel Heritage Map, a town remembered. It wasn't a standard street guide, no grids, no cold coordinates. Instead, the map curved gently, hand-drawn with watercolor strokes and storybook charm. A painted tractor rolled across Carter Ridge, tiny sunflowers lined Elise Lane, and a hawk soared in the corner where Farmer's Bend curled near the woods. Every road had a line of text beneath it, not a direction, but a memory. Jacob's Crossing, where one man helped others before helping himself. Carter Way. Because sometimes the quietest roads carry the strongest hearts. Elise Lane, a path built not on arrival, but on choosing to stay. Grandpa's Turn, where the ridge looks like heaven and you start to believe it. It was more than a map. It was a museum folded into a pocket. Tourists came not just for scenery, but for stories. They followed the trail of signs like breadcrumbs, each stop a moment etched into the land. Some asked where they could find the barn that lost its roof. Others wanted to stand beneath the billboard and trace their fingers along the quote they'd read online. The coffee shop started selling framed copies of the map. The library added a digital version to its website. One couple came all the way from Oregon, holding the brochure like a love letter. And back at the farm, Jacob kept driving his tractor, his hands still rough, his hat still low. When asked about the map, he'd just smile and say, "Guess someone finally noticed the roads were worth remembering." But Elise knew the truth. They weren't remembering the roads. They were remembering him. And every turn, every fork, every winding stretch of dirt that once led to nowhere now led home. The girl had been driving for hours, her GPS long since confused, her phone battery blinking its last breath. She was 17, fresh out of high school, on her first solo road trip to somewhere she couldn't quite pronounce, but it had lakes and trees and a music festival her parents hadn't entirely approved of. She meant to take the interstate. She meant to stop for gas 2 towns back. But she took the wrong exit just past mile marker 42, distracted by a hawk circling low in the sky. By the time she noticed, the road had narrowed and the world around her had shifted. Less pavement, more gravel. Less noise, more stillness. And then the sign appeared, Carter Way. She slowed, blinking at the name. The road was long and curved gently between open fields. In the distance, a red barn stood proud against the skyline, sun setting just behind it in warm gold. The air smelled like cut grass and something sweeter, baking bread maybe, or memory. She pulled to the side, stepped out, dust kicking up around her sneakers. There was a man by the fence, older but not frail. A straw hat shaded his face. A mug steamed gently in his hand. "Excuse me," she called. "I think I'm lost." He looked up the way someone does when they've been expecting company, even if they didn't know it. "Happens more than you'd think on this road." She smiled sheepishly. "I was trying to find Route 5. My map quit on me." He nodded once. "You're not far, but while you're here, you might as well know where you've landed." He walked closer, motioned toward the sign behind her. "That road used to be nameless, just dirt and dust, until a woman got lost here once, asked for directions." The girl tilted her head. "And that changed everything?" He nodded. "Not all at once, but slowly, like seeds. Someone started paying attention to the people who built the place, not just the buildings." She glanced at the sign again. "Carter Way." "What was his name?" she asked. The man smiled gently. "You just said it.